basically diving into your why
Yeah.
of why it's hard to run on empty, because I have a feeling you got a good story for us.
I have some firsthand experience with this, why you can't run on empty. And ultimately it comes from, like, what it comes down to is you can't serve others. So many of us want to serve others, but we can't when we have drained ourselves. And my story really started early at age 17 when I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And I was the type of personality, like, I've always been really type A, go-getter, pretty driven, caretaker, peacemaker, all of that stuff. And when it hit me at age 17, it was pretty devastating. I was getting ready to start college and had a lot of plans, and ended up in the hospital, and then got thrown into this system of medical care telling me that nothing had caused it. There was nothing I could do about it. I had no control. It just is what it is. There's no reason. And so take these medications and this is your path for life. And so, of course, at 17, you don't really know better. And this was, not to date myself too much, but this was way before internet and being able to Google anything. Yeah. So, you just had to rely on what they were saying. And so I did. I took medications and just kind of managed, got through college, managing from flare up to flare up with a lot of pretty scary medications. Sometime in my early 20s, I think this was just intuition. I started to really question the advice I was being given, because it just did not intuitively make sense to me that I had this painful digestive disorder that was not affected at all by food or how I was living. And they said it really doesn't matter what you eat. And that just made no sense to me. So that is really the beginning of me starting to try to explore and understand if there was other ways to manage this. I will tell you, there was also a piece of me that just did not sit right with your body's attacking itself. Like, your immune system is broken, your body's attacking itself. And I'm like, but why? Why would it do that? I don't understand. It's supposed to protect us. Is it maybe trying to protect me from something? So again, this was kind of early before I had to rely on, like, books I could find and, just sort of like trial and error myself. But I did start to discover some things. I started to make changes with diet. It had enough of an impact that it got my attention. I was like, okay, something is shifting here when I changed my diet. But the piece that I was massively missing, which comes to the, you can't run on empty, is the stress level was consistent. And I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and driving and taking care of everybody and everything, and kept leading to bigger and bigger setbacks. So this is where yoga came into my life. And sometime in my late 20s, actually, when I was expecting my son, who just turned 18. But so it was, so 19 years ago, I discovered yoga because I was really in a lot of pain during my pregnancy with my joints, which was part of my autoimmune issue. Mm. And I did yoga truthfully because it was the only movement I could do. And I was frustrated that I couldn't run and couldn't, beat my body up in the way that I was used to. So I did yoga out of desperation. And then something interesting started to happen, which was that this very gentle practice that I was just doing in my living room really started to shift how I was reacting and feeling emotionally on a daily basis. It calmed everything in my nervous system down. And miraculously, I started to notice the impact on my Crohn's and the joints. So yoga became then a huge journey for me. And ultimately, I left my corporate world and opened a yoga studio. Grew that business for almost a decade. But you know how it goes, Debra. We love to take care of others and still not take care of ourselves.
So life led you.
Yes. And then it was like, oh, but I'm so busy taking care of everybody else. I'll eventually take care of myself again.
Right.
And so then having this large business then started to burn me out once again. And where that ended up leading was in 2019, after a period of being very well for a very long time, because the yoga and the food was doing so much to keep me sustained. I really was able to, I mean, the train was going to come off the tracks. Let's put it that way.
Right.
I was not taking care of myself. I wasn't, the stress levels were high. And then in 2019, I actually had like a really big setback, a huge flare. And I was on a plane on my way to Costa Rica to lead a yoga retreat. I had just decided to sell the yoga studios because I knew, like, that knowing in me was like, you can't keep doing this anymore. You have to release it.
Yeah.
And it's like, as soon as I'll tell you, that day that I got on the plane, I had accepted the offer on the yoga studio sale. And then my body was like, oh, thank God. And now you have to rest. And so by the time I arrived in Costa Rica, I was in critical condition. Like, the Crohn's came back on the plane. And I had to go back and go in the hospital for over a week. And then this is where this new depth of study around functional medicine, really looking at the whole picture of holistic healing, because I was facing medication once again. And I wasn't going to do it. I know better. I know that there are ways to calm my body down. And I knew there had to be some root causes that I hadn't figured out. So I started working with a functional medicine practitioner and then began studying on my own. And that is ultimately what has led me to this. So I obtained full healing. At that point, I had 5 diagnosed autoimmune diseases. And reversed them all. Understand now all the layers, all the puzzle pieces, the complexity, but also the simplicity sometimes in it.
True enough.
I had to help people. So this is where I'm at. It was like, so I left my corporate job again, because I was back after selling the studios. I was back in corporate America for many years, as the head of people, and for like remote tech companies. But all the while I was studying my functional medicine degree and moving in this direction, because I was like, people need to know, they need to know, they can heal. So that's where I'm at.
So that's what gets me really excited, is the why. When I hear people's stories and the why that has kind of trajectoried them to where they are today, really has significance. And some of the things that I just want to pull out of what you've shared with us is illness tends to get our attention. But do we have to wait for that illness really to happen? And the other thing that you mentioned is we need to be questioning. We need to come from a place of curiosity, because when people are telling us these diagnoses, or I like to call them labels, we tend to just accept them versus question them and challenge them and see what else is possible. Now, I have a background in healthcare, so I know that, some medicines are necessary, but I also know that we can also have a complementary approach in which we have medicines, but when we can look that there's a holistic place involved and not just be reliant on thinking that there's this single pill that's going to fix everything. Right. Versus thinking how movement and music, and I am a recovering person of yoga. I just until this past year, I've had to embrace yoga on my own health journey. And it took me 12 weeks to enjoy restorative yoga. It started with looking at the clock. It's like, 2 minutes. Got 35 more to go, and then it was 17 minutes. And my girlfriend's like, you need this, because I couldn't get my mind to slow down with my body. And I knew something was off, but I couldn't figure out exactly what it was. And when she said that, and anytime I went to yoga before that, I had gone 3 times before that, I would look at the door and want to bolt. And I could just feel this restlessness. I'm looking at everybody doing their poses, thinking they're so relaxed. And I'm like, how can you be relaxed? I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
And So when you shared, that holistic approach and feeling like you have no control, that there is a way to have control. And that's why, I think it's so valuable that you're sharing your story, because we can't run on empty. We can't care for
Mm-mm.
other people. And whenever we keep pushing, there's that tendency that life will draw us back to learn that lesson until we do.
Yes.
And so one of the questions I have, that as you were saying everything, that because I think I have a very similar personality to you, Tiffany, that you want to get things done.
Yeah.
You're always pushing through and you're taking care of other people. What have you noticed about the personality types of the people that you work with?
Mm.
Do they tend to be that go-getters?
Yes. Yes. I would say exclusively those are my clients. Something about my story resonates with them. They feel like connected and drawn to me. They also know that I understand it. Because I'm certainly never going to tell anybody that they shouldn't have the life they want and chase the goals they want. And
Mhm.
it's not like it's one or the other, which was actually the messaging that I got. It was like,
Right.
you either have to be resting or going full steam ahead, and there's nothing in between. And that's a false narrative, actually. And it comes from fear of lack. It comes from, I think, without embracing abundance, you just worry that if you're not busy all the time, something's going to fall through the cracks. And there's just this beautiful in between where you actually, by slowing down a bit, just a bit, I'm not saying take it full off the throttle, but
Right.
tweak some things that are really impactful. And then it actually magically creates more time and space, and you're much more productive and you get a lot more done. So I think people who are drawn to me understand that, like, I'm not going to tell them, yeah, you got to quit your job. You can't exercise. You can't do all these things you're doing. I'm going to work with them to figure out, like, let's start the healing and let's figure out the small changes that are going to give you a lot of transformation quickly. And then we'll start to, like, it's baby steps. This is a journey and a whole lifestyle. And I'm going to take you through it. Like, trust me, I'm not going to make you give everything up. It's okay. That's the last
Right.
thing a
Yeah.
type A person wants to hear is like,
Yeah.
I have to stop everything and go sit in a mountain and meditate for 30 days. Like, no, you
Right.
don't have to. Maybe you do have to go to a restorative yoga class and not bolt for the door. Maybe that is what you have to do. But
Well, one of the things I learned about with restorative yoga, often a phrase that had been said in it, is give yourself the permission to do nothing.
Mhm.
And when I hear the word healing, we often, think of it as this complete rest, like do
Yes.
nothing, lay in bed all day. And that's not what it means.
No.
So I'd love for you to shed more light on what the healing process and that resting really can look like.
That's such a great question. And I'm with you. I don't, that is the message you hear, or that's how you perceive it. And actually, I think healing is a very active process. And in fact, my pillars that I teach my clients that I work through, the acronym is AMEND, AMEND, and it stands for action, mindset, energy, nourishment, and detox. And it's a constant cycle. It's actually like an infinity symbol. It's not a straight line where you just powerboat and you've arrived and you're healed and then that's it. Like, that's not
Right.
how it works. It's a constant process, but it starts with action. Healing starts with action and a choice. And I think, of course, there are times that require complete rest. Like, I don't know, you break something and you can't keep walking around on it. There's some extreme examples, but actually the body requires energy production to heal. And so it's a matter of, like, balancing the two. And sometimes the appropriate activity and the appropriate action is actually the best rest, because you want to create. So we hear about stress, right? And it becomes really negative to talk about stress. Like, stress is bad, stress is evil, stress you have to avoid. And that's actually not true. Stress can be really good. There's a thing called hormetic stress, which is like a good stressor on the body. It's like when you lift weights, You don't get stronger without creating stressor and actually tearing down the muscle. Then your body can repair. And it's really similar in the healing process, where it's like, you actually do need to continue to move. You've got to keep your lymph flowing. You can't just sit and do nothing and watch TV. Like, that's not how you're going to heal. You have to move, maybe in the sun. But maybe it is, I'm just going to give an example. Maybe what it is instead of doing 4:30 a.m. CrossFit workouts on a fasted stomach while your adrenals are totally fried and you're experiencing complete burnout,
Right.
maybe it's shifting to walking for an hour in the morning and being in the sun and doing deep breathing, and then lifting some light weights in a more gentle way, a little less frequently. Like, that's just one example, but it doesn't mean going from full steam ahead to stopping on a dime.
Yeah.
It's a matter of just like tweaking what you're doing so that your body understands, oh, there is some extra energy now, and extra space, and extra opportunity for me to do some repair. And that's what you're trying to create, is the conditions for repair, because your body knows how to do it, but we get in the way. we don't let it.
Because if you think about it, if you're going full steam ahead and all of a sudden you're at zero, that probably does more damage than you just slowing the process and really being mindful of
Absolutely.
that pace. Now, there's key reasons we're seeing a large energy shortage in the professional world. And you were talking about, wanting to expand so we have more energy. But if we're having an energy crisis, what are the reasons for that?
Well, I'll tell you, there's of course a lot of reasons, and it depends on each individual lifestyle, but I will tell you some of the largest patterns I see. And I'll also share with you and your audience one of the big things nobody's actually talking about, which I think trumps everything else. So overall, I mean, here are the contributing factors. We're not sleeping appropriately at night. Most of us are not getting like really well rested, uninterrupted sleep, and in a state of like where your body can repair, meaning it's not being bombarded with EMFs and noise and, these different things that it needs. Technology is draining us, and all of us are on it more and more and more. And in addition to that, there's just like no boundaries, right? I remember in my early days of working that it was like, I actually left work. I left it. There was no emails later. It was just like work was done. I went home. I came back. That was it. And now there's no boundaries, and we're just working all the time. So it's like so one of the main patterns is that I see from people that they're stuck. We have the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system, and we're stuck in sympathetic overdrive with no rest. And sometimes, unfortunately, the things that we're choosing to decompress are adding to that sympathetic overdrive. So I don't want to make people upset, because I was guilty of it, but like sitting and binge watching Netflix for hours at night and sitting in front of more blue light and not having movement and not having fresh air is, even though it feels like unwinding, is actually revving up the cortisol even more. So we're unknowingly like harming our hormones by the way that we're decompressing sometimes. But here's the big one that I think is missing even in this space where I operate, because everybody talks about food and toxins. We're all very aware of that now, right? Like there's chemicals and there's toxins, and of course those are contributing. But the piece that is actually crucial is our connection with nature and the rhythm of the earth and the world. We are not outside. We're just inside all the time. And right, like we're not connecting to, we cannot pretend that we're not mammals. We are biological creatures that have mitochondria inside of us that are taking their cue from nature. And if we're not connecting with it, if there's no opportunity for fresh air, for some sunshine, for grounding, getting your feet in the earth, touching a tree, getting in water, not a pool during lunch at the Y, you know, getting in like natural water.
Yeah.
These are basic things that we would like to think that like as humans, we can survive without nature, and we can't.
Yeah.
So that is actually, in my opinion, the biggest one. And it's the one nobody's talking about. They'll give you a plethora of supplements and a diet, and you're going to feel better-ish for a while. But this is where people end up coming back too frustrated because it doesn't last.
Yeah.
This is the piece.
Very much a lifestyle change, and
Yes.
movement is the medicine. And it's surprising to me, you know, people will say, well, yeah, I've been out in the sun today. I went from the garage to another garage, you know, and maybe they went out of the building to get a coffee, but that's it.
Yes.
Like we talk about, you know, 30 to 60 minutes of activity, or we talk about, you know, how many hours of sleep, how much water, but do we talk about how much sunshine or
Right.
vitamin D that we should be, you know, getting in a day?
Right.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. We're not talking about that enough.
No. And you know, I'll tell you, I was guilty of it myself during the years after selling the yoga studio during a healing process, but I was working in these high demand, high pressure corporate jobs.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I'm not getting enough activity. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm getting a treadmill desk, and I'm going to walk underneath my desk inside. And then I'm going to get this like, there's this like vibration plate, and that'll move your lymph. So I would stand on that, and I would put a red light on my desk, and I was biohacking my way through life. And it was like, or start taking some meetings on a phone and go outside and do a walk-in meeting. I mean, these things just hadn't occurred to me. And
because now you can record your meetings, walk, and if you need to get notes after, you can get a transcript. There's so many different things that people could be using, so that they are able to take care of themselves.
Yes. But it's not being talked about enough. It's not. And there's all these devices that everybody's willing to sell you so that you never have to leave the convenience of your home. You could work from home, live from home, play from home. You can exercise from home. You don't ever have to leave your house. If you don't want to. And
we're meant to be social creatures, right? So when you go out in the world, you kind of see how the rest of the world is living. But you also can, you know, see where you fit in. Right, to become your best self. So you know, we often hear about chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia and things like that. And I've read different stories about how people have also reversed those things. What are some of the most common causes of chronic fatigue that you see with executive level clients?
Again, you know, there's a lot of different reasons that can be really individual, but I will say some really large themes that I see repeatedly. There's a lot of hidden stressors that I mentioned before that are contributing to our biologic health. So I mentioned mitochondria. Mitochondria essentially, just really simple. I mean, we do learn about it in school, but not to the degree of like its importance. Mitochondria are really their own beings. They're not human, and they have their own DNA. So what's important about that is kind of going back to what I said, which is that they're taking their cues from nature, and they drive every function in our body, every function. So when you just think about that simply, we have to be taking care of the mitochondria. Why that's important is that, again, our modern lifestyle creates the conditions where we're not feeding or giving the right cues to our mitochondria. So here are kind of the big buckets that I see that are causing mitochondrial dysfunction, which is ultimately chronic fatigue is mitochondrial dysfunction. You could literally boil down every disease to mitochondrial dysfunction, because when those are not working properly, there's no energy production, which means no cellular repair and no communication in your body. And so it'll go to your specific weak links, you know, and everybody kind of have different ones. But the things that contribute the most to that mitochondrial dysfunction is not getting the input from nature, mineral depletion. minerals, I would say, are one of the largest things that I see in my clients. They are very, very imbalanced and depleted in minerals. And minerals are the fuel that, so if mitochondria is producing the energy, that's using minerals as the fuel. And if you don't have proper minerals, you're not going to have any gasoline to repair, to run the system, so mineral depletion imbalance, blue light toxicity, if you're not protecting yourself. I get it. I'm on technology too. Here we are right now. It's part of, but there's some things you can do to protect yourself. And I see with the people I work with who are, executives and high powered individuals who are always on devices, they could be protecting themselves a bit more, and, they don't have to give them up, but they could use some, but that actually depletes your mitochondria. So that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
And improper hydration, I would say, is another key one. And then all these things sort of lead to the things we're hearing a lot of now, right? Like leaky gut, and chronic inflammation. But those are all those are like downstream effects of these sort of higher upstream things I'm talking about. Yeah.
It's fascinating because, I think we take for granted, if I ask somebody how much water they drink, there isn't a lot. I know that was something that I had to have a water on my desk. I put a picture on my desk so I could see the glass empty and see the jug being emptied, because otherwise I could be in the office all day and not pay attention.
Sure.
And I know executives that I've worked with that they don't always have a drink on their desk.
No.
Their secretary or is telling them it's time to eat lunch, take a break, because, we're used to just pushing through and being strong and, leading all the time. That it's really important to think of those little things. And, when people think of leadership, they're thinking of all these big steps that people do, command the room and executive presence and, going after a strategic plan. But all of that happens when that leader takes care of themselves and leads by example, truly, in daily habits.
Yes.
So what are some of the day-to-day habits that could be culprits leading to chronic fatigue? I might have just jumped into a couple of them.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what you've seen.
Yeah, you did cover some of them, hydration for sure, like just not hydrating and not hydrating properly. It's not a matter of just drinking tons of water. It's really important that those minerals are in the water. So making sure you have electrolytes and minerals in your water can be like key. But some of the other culprits, this is also one that I'm like, when I tell my clients, I'm like, don't shoot the messenger, but I have to speak the truth. When your habit is to look at your phone first thing in the morning and you haven't created any space for yourself in the morning time before you jump into that, then that's twofold. One, again, it's blue light, which I can explain more, but it has to do with like, it actually, the light that your eyes see, the color spectrum that they see at any time of day, literally sets all of your biological processes for the day. It tells your body exactly when to start producing hormones, when to start digestion. It sets the clock for the day. So if you give it blue light first thing in the morning, which happens more later morning, early afternoon, you've started producing cortisol immediately when you wake up.
Wow. I don't think people would realize that at all.
They don't realize that. Like there's a spectrum to follow, and cortisol happens at a time of day that's appropriate. Then your body's like, oh, okay, now it's go time. I have to get through the day and work. That's when cortisol is appropriate. When you do it at 5 or 6 a.m., it sets an unnatural rhythm for your body. But then also it's like, what are you inviting in as the start of the day? Because whatever information you're consuming on your phone also sort of sets the tone. So back to your comment about leadership, the best leaders, and we've all experienced them, they have a pause, right? They have a clarity that only comes from somebody who has created enough space within themselves that they're really in tune with the right decisions. They're really good listeners, and they're not reacting. And this comes from these habits. So,
and not constantly distracted either.
Yes. They know how to make space to have clear decisions that are going to be effective, how to
Mhm.
listen to people well, and they get more done. So yeah, this morning looking at the phone, and with that kind of hand in hand is just our morning routine in general. If people ask me what is the one thing, if I would only change one thing,
Mhm.
I would have people not have their phone in their bedroom,
Yeah.
have it away, and then get up and see the sunrise with their naked eyes, like step outside. It only has to be 5 minutes. It's
Yeah.
not a big commitment. And then whatever, 5 minutes, drink your tea, do some deep breathing, whatever you want to do in those minutes. Hopefully it extends longer because you realize like you get selfish about your morning. You're like, I'm not letting anybody steal my morning. But I know
Yeah.
people have kids and they have things like an hour routine in the morning is not necessarily going to work for everybody, but 5 minutes, you sure could do 5 minutes.
Oh, for
Nobody
sure.
cannot do 5 minutes.
And that explains why you hear more and more about the 5 a.m. club, 5:30, so that you can have that time to
Yeah.
yourself.
It's so important. So I would say like these are the stealers though. These are the culprits, is like not protecting your morning routine and not protecting your evening routine, like just going full force until you just crash or pass out or something. And so like if you can bookend those, I would say like those are really where the energy drain is happening the most significantly. And it has a lot to do with hormones and how we need to be setting up our, protecting the time of the morning when cortisol starts, and then protecting the time of the evening when cortisol stops or should stop, so that melatonin can take over. And these two bookends of our lifestyles, I would say that's the main culprit. There's some, and then of course there's other things like
Right.
the foods we're eating and the products we're using, and that kind of like those assaults during the day are not helping. But the two most critical that are draining people unknowingly is simply their routines in morning and night.
Yeah. And then, when you talk about the morning and night, I totally get it. Because when I've been on my top of my game, it's usually been when I have that structured morning routine. I feel like I got the house to myself and I can just zone in journaling or just do some breathing or visualization or meditate, and feel like there's no demands on you.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Everybody needs that space.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, like I said, we each have these lifestyle demands. You've got kids and you have responsibilities. There are ways to use your existing routines and just tweak them a little. Like if you have to walk the dog in the morning,
Yeah.
great. Like, take the dog out,
Yeah.
enjoy, like be in that early morning sun and do some deep breathing. You don't necessarily have to put a podcast on. That's what I always did. I was like, okay, well, I got to multitask because I can't just walk, right? Like I'd have to be doing something. I'm like, no, quiet is fine. And it's, or whatever, everybody's different, what kind of fills them up, but it's important to recognize like what makes me feel maybe that's your time to read in the morning. 10 pages a day, they say, can like really add huge value. It's like 10 pages.
Yeah.
Pick a book that fills you up and inspires you and start your day with that. Like, we all brush our teeth, like do some deep breathing while you're brushing your teeth, or like, there's a lot of ways to work into existing routines even.
So what I hear you saying is a little bit more integration of looking at someone's individual routine and how they can integrate it and tweak that lifestyle so that they can have that time to themselves. Because one of the things that, one of thought leader I was listening to, he was talking about how, when we're struggling with a decision or we're working on a project, to go outside for a walk, be in nature, but don't go put on a podcast. Don't go because you're not allowing your brain to have a break. And that break is where those eureka moments, those epiphany moments happen, when we're not filling the silence. And I think what we've come to is that people fill the silence so much because they're almost afraid to be around their own thoughts, or they think that they must be busy all the time.
Yes. Yeah. It's such a terrible myth, right? It's like, I talk about this a lot. This doesn't come from me. This was from Gabor Mate, but it really
Yeah.
sat with me, the myth of normal. And it's like, well, this is normal. Everybody's doing it. This is normal. Well, it's like,
Yeah.
no, it might be common that this is how we're all behaving,
Yeah.
but it's not normal in terms of like how our human biology works.
Yeah.
And what you just described is exactly the cause of what I was saying before, which is people
Yeah.
stuck in sympathetic overdrive because that
Yeah.
noise keeps your conscious brain consuming.
Yeah.
And where those epiphanies and understandings come in is when you've quieted down, you're in parasympathetic, and it's the unconscious mind that can take over and bring stuff in that you're
Yeah.
not even aware of, that's outside of your periphery of your conscious thoughts. And like, but you're right. I think people are scared to observe their thoughts, which
Mhm.
I get it. I don't like my thoughts a lot of the time. I'm like,
I get it
wow.
too. But
Wow.
it's amazing when you have the breakthrough ones. It's just like, where did that come from? Man, I'm
Totally.
brilliant.
Yeah. But actually you hit on such an important part. This is why we have to lean into the discomfort of our thoughts,
Yeah.
is that if you don't learn the chatter, what the difference is between the chatter
Mm.
and that knowing, which are coming from two different places,
Yeah.
you won't recognize the amazing thoughts when they come, because you'll just dismiss them as your own chatter if you don't know the difference. And so, yes, it's uncomfortable. People tell me all the time, I can't meditate because I can't shut off my thoughts. And I'm like, brilliant. That's a brilliant place to meditate from, actually,
Yeah.
because you have nothing to learn if you can shut off your thoughts. What you actually have to learn comes from watching all of your monkey mind thoughts. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
you know, you're
Exactly.
just like a chipmunk chasing itself. Like,
Yeah.
watch that. But what's so cool about that is it's like, I will never forget the moment that this occurred to me as I was watching thoughts that I didn't like. And I was like, oof. And then you're trying not to react to them, but you're like, well, I don't like that thought. Like, where's that coming from?
Yeah.
But then you realize, if I can observe my thoughts, I must be separate from them.
Yeah.
There's no way to observe them if they are you.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's like,
yeah.
it's so simple, but then you realize, like, okay, I don't have to identify. And that goes back to your comment about labels. It's like you're given a label about something and then you identify as that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have the anxious thoughts. Well, so I am an anxious person. You know, we have these things that then we identify with that aren't the truth of who we are.
No, not at all.
You
Not at
know?
all.
So yeah.
You know, one of the Gabor Mate, when you said that myth of normal, it is so true that because everyone's doing it, we think it's normal and we don't think to question it because it looks so common.
Yes.
And that is so profound, because I'm just thinking of a comment someone said to me the other day. Well, everybody's doing it. And I'm like, yeah, so so what? You know, but it still doesn't mean it's right. Right. It might look like, and it's usually your circle too. When you say everybody's doing it, it's usually a handful of 5 people.
Yeah.
Right. So to really think about, are you going to challenge some of the things that you consider normal? And I would, everyone who's listening or watching this here on YouTube, I want you to challenge. Take Tiffany up on, what she's saying. Like, what can you challenge as normal? Is it really that common, or is it that because the circle you surround yourself with has made it common?